Engineering leadership and any type of leadership isn't about having the best answers in the room. It's about helping others learn how to reason through ambiguity and trade-offs. Good questions slow things down just enough to make some information that perhaps we didn't consider before visible. Hi, and welcome back. In this episode, I want to talk about one thing that I found to be extremely effective as an engineering manager, and I do almost every day, and that is asking questions. I will start with a concrete example, and then I'll talk why I think this matters. And at the end, I'll share one small thing that you can try in your own work. So here's an example. Earlier in my career, when I transitioned from being a software engineer to an engineering manager, every time I reviewed a technical design document or I heard of an idea that I would disagree with, my instinct was just to respond with a strong opinion. Loosely held, but a strong opinion. I think we should do it this way. I don't think this will scale. I've seen this fail before. I would just give what my opinion was. And sometimes I was right. But when I did this consistently, I noticed two things. First is that people would either defend their idea harder or they would just say that I was right because I was the manager in the room. And second, that even when the direction changed, it felt like my decision, not theirs. And over time, I didn't like this, so I started experimenting with different approaches. Instead of leading with statements, I started leading with questions. And this showed up in a lot of places. When reviewing a design doc, when someone shared an early idea, when the team was stuck between two different approaches, when something just felt off but I couldn't really articulate why, I would ask questions. I would ask things like, what trade-offs did you consider? What assumptions does your opinion rely on? What would make you change your mind? Where do you think this is going to break in the future? So questions that encourage the other person to think further. Often I already had a point of view, but what I found is that asking questions helped me understand their thinking better, and at the same time, it forced them to think more clearly. And what changed wasn't just the discussion, it was the ownership. People explain their reasoning. They often surface risks that before they were not contemplating. And the final decision felt more like something that we arrived at together rather than something that I impose because I was providing my answer. There's an author called Edgar Schein, I think that's how I pronounce his name, that writes about this in a book called Humble Inquiry. His core idea is that in complex systems, complex environments, leaders get better outcomes by asking genuine questions rather than leading with answers. And these are not performative questions or questions with a hidden agenda, like tricky questions. There is just real curiosity. Even when you already have an opinion, you want to know more. And his point is that when leaders jump straight to answers, people stop to think out loud. Genuine questions do the opposite. They make it easier for good information and better thinking to surface. And that feels very true and important in engineering teams, especially in fast-moving environments where there is a lot of ambiguity. So this is why I think it matters. First is that questions help build judgment. Engineering leadership and any type of leadership isn't about having the best answers in the room. It's about helping others learn how to reason through ambiguity and trade-offs. Good questions slow things down just enough to make some information that perhaps we didn't consider before visible. Second is that statements tend to sound like conclusions, and questions create a space, that space where potentially better ideas and decisions tend to emerge. Third is that questions model the behavior that you want to see. If you as a leader ask thoughtful questions, it signals to other people that it is okay to be curious, to ask questions, to accept that there is uncertainty. And that ultimately makes it easier for teams to surface concerns earlier, which ultimately is going to make things cheaper in the future. There is another thing here that I believe is important, which is you need to play the balance between when to ask a question and when actually the team needs an answer, right? Sometimes as a manager, you need to provide that clarity. You either have the context to provide that clarity, or sometimes there is some time constraints and you just need to move on and be decisive. Now, this doesn't mean you should always ask questions, right? Knowing when to ask questions versus when to be decisive is part of your job. Sometimes the team needs clarity. Sometimes you have the context that other people don't have. And sometimes you just need to move fast. And time is a constraint that you should consider. But if everything sounds like a conclusion, people will stop thinking out loud. They will just expect you to have an answer. And that's a cost that I've seen teams don't notice until it's too hard to reverse. So here's one small thing you can try. The next time you're reacting to a technical design document, maybe an idea, a proposal, pause before you share your opinion, even if you have one. And instead, ask a couple of genuine questions. Not tricky ones, just questions that help surface assumptions or trade offs. Make that person think further and then see their reaction. Do they discover new information? Do they arrive to different conclusions? That question or set of questions might do more work than the answer that you would have. That's all what I have for today. I hope you found something useful, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.